Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all the ships at sea. Delay, deny, defend. That is the name of a book authored in 2010 by Jay Feinman, which exposes the healthcare insurance corporation's practices of purposefully denying claims and/or delaying them, and defending their obstinate stance to ailing customers to the brutal end. That, my viewers, is how many of these healthcare insurers continue to show gains to shareholders and the CEOs get multi-million-dollar annual bonuses, all at the pain, suffering, and even lost lives of innocent paying American citizens. And then we had a shooting in New York City on December 4th. Cold-blooded? Yes. Heartless? I would say unequivocally, no. But what do you mean by that, puppet, you say? How long do you think the healthcare mafia has been putting the hurt on Americans now? 20 years? 30 years? Try longer. What we have in the United States of America is a decades-long crime spree perpetrated upon the citizens of a supposedly first-world nation, and one not experienced anywhere else in the civilized world. So now comes an assailant to right the wrongs, to reap the rewards of years and years of a cartel sowing purposeful, distinctly targeted torture and pain upon a U.S. citizenry that did nothing whatsoever to deserve it. And what were this assailant's own words? Deny, defend, depose. Would it be safe to say that this was a person who may have been wronged by the large insurance mafia that this victim was head of? Yeah. Sowing and reaping, where have we heard that before? Please allow this puppet the liberty to go now to the book of Galatians, specifically chapter 6. This was a letter the Apostle Paul wrote to the early Christian church in Galatia. This specific verse I am referencing reads as follows. Do not be deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. That is from the New King James English Version translation, but other translations substitute the word death for corruption in that verse. Am I celebrating this killing that took place 3 days ago? By no means. Am I saying that it was righteous and justified? Perhaps. In the eyes of this puppet, this killing was what is termed a day of reckoning, and I believe we will see even more to come in the new United States of America. You see, we have just spent almost 4 years having every facade of supposed protection of our government institutions torn down before our very eyes, systematically and methodically by a felon who was in fact installed in the office of the U.S. presidency and his cadre of criminal accomplices. It is now common knowledge that the Department of Justice is nothing that it was ever purported to be, and that the FBI and CIA both covered for and in fact conspired to install and then keep in power the worst treasonous liar this nation may have ever witnessed. The facades are smashed. We live at this very moment in a nation that has wised up to the fact that to get justice, the government is the last place to go to. So if you wanted to call it a word this puppet generally despises, you could say that we as a people are now woke. Haha. And that we have awakened to the fact that the governmental systems are largely stacked heavily against us, not for us. What we have become even more so than any moment prior in the nation's lengthy history are a people now with our keenly trained ears to the pavement, always on the watch for the next criminal activity to be perpetrated upon us, and that, my friends, is not an advantageous place for the United States to be in. Vigilante justice, something not really in the common vernacular since the days of the Old West, has now come back into being probably more commonplace. I can assure you, my loyal patrons, that we are now living in different times, and that this is not necessarily a good thing. No, the United States citizenry is now more astute to the crimes being committed against them within the halls of government institutions and corporate meeting rooms in hotels in New York City. We now have roving street gangs from Venezuela here in the states formerly not impacted by that brand of crime, and that spells a recipe for disaster also. I can foresee more than one vigilante taking matters into their own hands against these savages, seeing as the government placed them here in our midst to begin with. You and I both know, my viewers, that the United States is thankfully a gun culture, and that has the propensity to play out in bloody fashion if the powers that be do not wise up. Yes, I say thankfully because we all know what eventually happens to a disarmed citizenry. Look up World War II Nazi Germany for reference. While this puppet would never call for violence, I can also see situations and circumstances, much like those perpetrated upon us by the United Healthcare and its corporate clones, that some who have been wounded or have loved ones injured by would deem as worthy of vindicating. Much in the same manner, the Democrats did nothing but claim that President-elect Donald Trump is Hitler and Mussolini all wrapped up in one, and then sat back bewildered when a teenager from Pennsylvania sought to destroy their imaginary foe. Yes, folks, we seem headed for a more lawless society now, if you will, and it has largely been foisted upon us by the current presidential administration, though not entirely. In fact, the healthcare mafia has been decades in the making and largely fueled by do-nothing politicians from both sides of the political aisle. Many knew as early as the 1980s that the medical care in the United States was headed down a dangerous path, yet continued to sit on their hands and let capitalism work its expected magic. Only you see, the magic that unfettered capitalism often works is not the optimal solution, and can in fact end in precipitous manner for all involved. What we should be striving for in the USA is managed capitalism, though the medical mafia has had next to no oversight by our government or its institutions for quite some time, and as such leads us to the point we're at now, the point where a CEO has lost his life, and prominently due to his own money-lust decisions. Some will even argue for governmental provided health care, much like some other nations seem to work with debatable degrees of success. Though one can also say that at least you do not see insurance corporation CEOs being gunned down in those. But folks, I can also point you to myriad sources of unrestrained pain and suffering in our current nation that could potentially also lead to similar vigilante justice tactics eventually being employed. Citizens have found that our government is not doing a single thing to help them in many situations, and taking matters into their own hands can become a valid solution in the eyes of some. Have we ever seen things like this in our history before? Yes. One can easily see that the Oklahoma City Federal Building bombing in 1995 was a vigilante situation whereby McVeigh and Nichols conspired to get vengeance on the ATF for the Waco, Texas standoff that killed many. Right or wrong? You be the judge of that. I do think, however, that we are now in a strange new world where government-sponsored, quote, law and order have gone by the wayside in the minds of many, and situations like we just saw 3 days ago could potentially and only continue to propagate, especially as so many deadbeat politicians from all major parties continue to take up space in the halls of our government. Good night, and sleep well.